The whisper of silk was the only sound in the room, a stark contrast to the roaring in Sloane Rutherford's ears. The wedding gown, a masterpiece of French lace and hand-stitched pearls, felt like a shroud. It was a costume for a role she never auditioned for. "Stand still, Sloane." Vivian Rutherford's voice was a sharp, precise instrument, honed over years of managing social climbers and, now, a disposable daughter. Her adoptive mother's fingers, cold and efficient, adjusted the diamond tiara nestled in Sloane's dark hair. "The cameras will be on you every second. Try to look less besieged." In the full-length mirror, Sloane saw the tableau of their final family portrait. Vivian, impeccably dressed, her beauty a frosty, permanent thing. Beside her, Edward Rutherford, who couldn't quite meet Sloane's eyes in the reflection, choosing instead to examine the cufflinks that cost more than a car. And then there was Blair. The real heiress. Blair leaned against the doorframe, a glass of champagne in hand, a smirk playing on her perfectly painted lips. She was the ghost at the feast, the truth that had shattered Sloane's life just a month ago. Found in some small town, living a modest life, and brought home to claim her birthright. Overnight, Sloane had plummeted from cherished daughter to inconvenient imposter. "It's a beautiful day for a wedding, isn't it, sis?" Blair drawled, her voice syrupy sweet. "Who would have thought you'd land on your feet? Or, well, in this case, on your knees." She took a slow sip. "But I suppose you have to be grateful. It's more than a charity case like you should expect." "Blair, that's enough," Edward murmured, but it was a token protest, devoid of any real force. Vivian finished with the tiara, her hands coming to rest on Sloane's shoulders. Her gaze in the mirror was stern, devoid of maternal warmth. "This is the only way, Sloane. The only way to repay 20 years of the life you stole. The Thorns are the most powerful family in Viridia City. This alliance will save our company. You will walk down that aisle, you will smile, and you will become Mrs. Caitlin Thorne. It is your duty. It is your penance." Sloane's knuckles were white where she clutched her bouquet of white roses, thorns carefully removed, a hollow symbol of the gilded cage she was entering. Caitlin Thorne. The heir to the Ethertech empire. The man who, 6 months ago, had his spine shattered in a tragic car accident. The man who was now confined to a wheelchair, his legendary temper now twisted into something reportedly monstrous and bitter. She was being sold to a crippled tycoon as a peace offering. A fake daughter for a broken prince. An hour later, the scent of thousands of imported white orchids was cloying, suffocating. The cathedral was a sea of Viridia's elite, their whispers a relentless hiss that followed her every step. She felt their eyes on her pity, disdain, and the sharp, delicious tang of schadenfreude. Asterisk look at the fake heiress, sold off to the monster. How the mighty have fallen. Asterisk the red carpet stretched before her like a mile-long tightrope. And at the end of it sat her future. Caitlin Thorne. He was positioned in a sleek, black titanium wheelchair, a throne of sorts. His tailored black suit did little to soften the imposing breadth of his shoulders. His face, it was a sculptor's dream, all sharp angles and harsh lines, with a jaw so tight it looked carved from granite. His hair was the color of polished ebony, and his eyes. His eyes were the coldest shade of gray she had ever seen, like a winter storm over a frozen sea. They fixed on her as she approached, and there was no warmth in them, no welcome. Only a glacial, simmering resentment. This was the man she was supposed to vow to love, to cherish. The priest's voice, solemn and echoing in the vast space, finally asked the question that hung over them all. "Sloane Rutherford, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" This was it. Her moment of rebellion. The only shred of dignity she had left. Her fingers tightened on the bouquet. She would not be their pawn. She would humiliate them as they had humiliated her. She drew a breath, ready to unleash the 2 words that would shatter the ceremony into a million scandalous pieces. Asterisk I don't. Asterisk but the words never left her lips. Because another voice, clear as a bell and laced with pure, undiluted panic, exploded inside her skull. "Don't you dare say no. Please, 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 you gorgeous, infuriating woman, don't do it. I swear on my life I'm not the monster they say I am. My legs work just fine. This is all so damn complicated, but if you walk away now, everything falls apart. Just say yes. Please, just say yes." Sloane froze. Her eyes, wide with shock, snapped to Kalen's. His expression hadn't changed. Not a single muscle twitched. The cold, disdainful mask was perfectly intact. But the voice was his. It had to be. The priest cleared his throat, uneasy. Miss Rutherford? The guests began to stir, a low murmur of confusion rippling through the pews. She saw Vivian's face, pale with fury, and Blair's, already beginning to curl into a triumphant smile. The voice in her head came again, quieter now, almost pleading. They told me you'd rather die than do this. They said you'd make a scene. Prove them wrong. Trust me. Just this once. Trust him? The man in the wheelchair who was screaming in his head? The man who was apparently not paralyzed? It was insane. It was impossible. But it was also the most intriguing thing that had happened to her in a year. A slow, deliberate smile touched Sloane's lips. She looked directly at Kalen, seeing past the icy mask to the desperate, scheming man beneath. She saw the faintest flicker of something shock in his stormy eyes. She took the microphone from the bewildered priest, her voice ringing out, clear and confident, through the cathedral. I do. The silence that followed was absolute, so profound you could hear the rustle of $1 billion fortune changing hands. Vivian's jaw was slack with shock. Blair's smile had melted into a mask of utter disbelief. And Kalen Thorne? For the first time, his perfect composure cracked. It was just a slight widening of the eyes, a barely perceptible intake of breath. But Sloane saw it. And she clearly heard the stunned, victorious thought that followed. Holy hell. She actually said yes. The game, it seemed, was on. The silence in the Rolls-Royce was a physical presence, thick and heavy as velvet. It was a stark contrast to the roaring chaos of the cathedral, the whispered gossip, the forced congratulations. Sloane sat as far from Kalen as the expansive back seat would allow, her body angled toward the window, watching the glittering spires of Viridia City blur into the exclusive, wooded enclave known as the Eyrie. He hadn't spoken a single word to her since the priest had pronounced them man and wife. He'd simply motioned for his assistant, a severe-looking woman in a tailored suit, to wheel him away. Sloane had been escorted by a different, equally silent attendant into the car. Now, he was a statue beside her, his profile sharp and unyielding against the passing scenery, his eyes closed as if in deep meditation or profound annoyance. But his mind was a raging torrent. Say something. Anything. Nice weather. Lovely riot of paparazzi back there. This silence is going to kill me. Is she already regretting it? She must be. Who wouldn't? Married a stranger in a fake ceremony to a guy in a wheelchair who isn't actually in a wheelchair. This is a new level of messed up, even for me. Sloane bit the inside of her cheek to stop a smile from forming. This was her reality now. A cold, silent husband on the outside, a frantic, neurotic commentator on the inside. It was terrifying and, she had to admit, utterly fascinating. Should I offer her a drink? There's champagne in the console. But if I open it, will she think I'm celebrating? Or that I'm a drunk? Maybe she's thirsty. She didn't drink anything at the reception. Did she? I was too busy trying to look tragically stoic to notice. God, I'm an idiot. She chanced to glance at him. His arms were crossed, his brow slightly furrowed. To anyone else, he was a man burdened by his new, unwanted circumstances. To Sloane, he was a man having a full-blown anxiety attack over minibar etiquette. The car slid through imposing, wrought-iron gates that opened soundlessly, revealing Thorne Manor. It wasn't a house, it was a statement. A masterpiece of steel and glass, all sharp angles and cold surfaces, perched on a cliff edge like a predator surveying its domain. It was breathtaking, and utterly soulless. The assistant, who'd introduced herself as Ms. Albright, led her through the cavernous entrance hall. Their footsteps echoed on polished concrete floors. The air was cool, smelling of ozone and money. There were no family photos, no messy art, no signs of life. It was a showroom, not a home. Your suite is on the second floor, Mrs. Thorne, Ms. Albright said, her voice as neutral as her expression. She gestured to a sweeping staircase. The master suite, of course, remains on the ground floor for the young master's convenience. Sloane understood. Separate rooms. Separate lives. She was a resident, not a wife. Her room was a study in minimalist luxury. A vast bed with white linens, a sitting area with angular furniture, and a wall of glass that looked out over the churning, moonlit ocean. It was beautiful, and it felt exactly like her old room at the Rutherfords', a beautifully decorated cage. She recognized Vivian's handiwork in the choice of art, the specific brand of linen. They had sold her, and they'd even curated the prison cell. A soft knock came at the door. An older woman with kind eyes and a warm smile stood there, holding a tray with a cup of tea and a small sandwich. "I'm Edith, the housekeeper, Mrs. Thorne," she said, her voice a gentle balm after the day's coldness. "The young master thought you might be hungry. The wedding fare is never enough to fill a person, is it?" Sloane accepted the tray, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Edith." Edith hesitated, wringing her hand slightly. "Mrs. Thorne, the young master, he's not what people say. The papers, they make him out to be a beast. But he's got a good heart. It's just, buried under a lot of, well, a lot. Please, don't be afraid of him." Sloane gave her a genuine smile. "I'm not afraid, Edith." The woman looked surprised, then relieved, and left her to her tea. Sloane changed out of the wedding dress, feeling a weight lift with each removed pearl. She showered, the hot water scouring away the feel of 1,000 judging eyes. Wrapped in a plush robe, she finally felt the exhaustion of the day claim her. She fell into the impossibly soft bed and into a deep, dreamless sleep. She was woken not by a sound, but by a presence. The digital clock glowed 2:17 a.m. Moonlight streamed through the glass wall, painting the room in shades of silver and blue. And there, standing by her bed, was a tall, dark silhouette. Kalen. He wasn't in his wheelchair. He was standing on his own two, perfectly functional legs, his shadow long and imposing against the wall. He was just watching her, his expression unreadable in the dim light, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs. She forced her breathing to remain even, her body limp. She played possum. "Such a little thing when she's asleep," his inner voice murmured, soft and utterly different from his daytime coldness or his internal panic. It was tender. Like a painting. All that fire, banked for the night. He took a silent step closer. Sloane could feel the warmth of his body now, smell the faint, clean scent of his soap. "I should go. This is insane. What am I doing?" He didn't move. Just once. "She'll never know." He leaned down slowly, his breath a ghost of warmth against her forehead. Sloane's every nerve was on high alert. Then, she felt it. The softest press of his lips against her skin. A kiss so gentle it was almost an illusion. Sweet dreams, Sloane, he thought, and then he was gone, melting back into the shadows as silently as he came. Sloane lay awake for a long time after, her skin tingling where his lips had been, the echo of his thought a warmer blanket than any she owned. The next morning, she found a set of clothes laid out for her, soft, expensive, and in her exact size, and a simple black card on the nightstand. No note. She was halfway through a breakfast of artfully arranged fruit and pastries, served to her in the sterile, vast dining room, when her phone rang. Vivian. The screen screamed the name. Sloane took a deep breath and answered. "Mother." The voice on the other end was a whip crack. "Don't you mother me, you ungrateful girl. What was that little performance yesterday? You were supposed to be compliant. You were supposed to look miserable. You looked like you'd just won the lottery. You forced me into this marriage," Sloane said, her tone flat. She took a deliberate bite of a croissant. "Now that I've accepted my fate, you're unhappy?" "I'm confused." "Your fate?" Vivian hissed. "Your fate is to be useful. Now listen carefully. The Rutherford Group needs an injection. 100 million. You will speak to your husband today. You will make him understand it's in his best interest to support his new family." Sloane's grip tightened on the phone. "Or what?" "Or we'll tell everyone the truth. That you're a fraud. That Kalen Thorne married a worthless imposter." Sloane actually laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Do you really think Kalen cares? Do you think the man who just married me to complete some obscure power play gives a damn about bloodlines? You seem to have misunderstood, Mother." She put a world of venom into the word. "I am Sloane Thorne now. Your family's debts are no longer my concern. She ended the call and dropped the phone on the table as if it were contaminated. At that exact moment, the door to the dining room opened and Ms. Albright wheeled Kaylin in. His gaze swept over her, then the phone, then back to her face. He dismissed his assistant with a curt nod. The room was, once again, filled with that heavy silence. Who was that? She looks like she's just swallowed acid. Was it her family? Of course it was her family. Those vultures. Are they already trying to pick at the carcass? Do they think my wife is a carcass? His internal voice was a protective, angry growl. Outwardly, he gestured with a perfectly manicured hand toward the black card on the table. The card has no limit. Buy whatever you need. Clothes. Jewelry. A new phone, if that one displeases you. His tone was bored, dismissive. Sloane looked at him, this man who had kissed her forehead in the dead of night. She decided to test the waters. And if my family comes to you, she asked, her voice deceptively light, and asks you to divorce me so you can marry the real heiress, Blair, would you do it? Kaylin went perfectly still. His gray eyes locked onto hers, and for a second, she saw the real man, the dangerous, calculating one peek through the ice. What does she mean? Is she testing me? Does she want out? Already? I just got her. No. Absolutely not. Over my dead body. She's mine. But his voice, when it came, was dripping with sarcasm. Sloane, don't flatter yourself. The gates of Thorn Manor aren't a revolving door. You're here now. Make your peace with it. And as for your real heiress, he sneered, the Rutherfords can keep their damaged goods. You do well to remember your place and not entertain foolish ideas. Otherwise, he leaned forward slightly, his eyes glinting, I'll have to teach you what true regret feels like. The threat was vicious, delivered with chilling precision. But Sloane didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Because ringing in her ears, loud and clear, was his triumphant internal crowing. Yes. That's it. Threaten her. Scare her. Make her too terrified to ever think about leaving. Genius. I am a strategic genius. She lowered her eyes, pretending to be cowed. I understand, she whispered. Oh, hell. Did I go too far? I went too far. I scared her. Look, she's shrinking. Idiot. Now she's going to be afraid of me. Quick, think of a way to fix it. Flowers? Jewels? A small tropical island? Sloane picked up her fork and took another bite of her fruit, hiding her smile. This was going to be infinitely more entertaining than she had ever imagined. The text from Blair arrived precisely at 10 a.m., as if she'd been counting the seconds until a socially acceptable hour to unleash her particular brand of venom. Asterisk sis. You must be dying of boredom in that sterile museum. A few of us are hitting the Viridia Galleria. You should come. Let the city see you're still alive. Asterisk Sloane read the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. She could picture Blair's smug face, the casual cruelty masquerading as sisterly concern. It was a trap, of course. A chance to parade the charity case in front of her high society friends and bask in the comparison. But Sloane wasn't the same broken girl from a month ago. She had a secret weapon, and a strange, burgeoning alliance with a man who pretended to be a statue. A slow, sly smile spread across her lips. If Blair wanted a performance, she'd give her one. Sounds lovely, she typed back. Asterisk see you at noon. Asterisk she found Kaylin in his study, a room that was all dark wood, towering bookshelves, and a massive holographic interface displaying scrolling lines of code and financial data. He was in his wheelchair, his back to her, seemingly engrossed. I'm going out, she announced from the doorway. Shopping with Blair. His shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. He didn't turn around. Blair? That viper? What does she want? This is a setup. They're going to tear her to pieces. She's tough, but their claws are sharp. Damn it. His thoughts were a low, protective rumble. Outwardly, he merely gave a curt nod. Inform Albright. She'll arrange the car. I should stop her. Forbid it. No, that's what a controlling monster would do. Which I'm supposedly not. Ugh. Sloane almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Don't worry, she said lightly, I can handle Blair. He finally swiveled his chair, his stormy eyes pinning her. I'm not worried. Just don't embarrass the Thorn name. The words were ice, but his mind was a raging inferno of concern. Please handle her. Eviscerate her. Use that sharp tongue of yours. But be careful. Why am I so worried? This is ridiculous. Sloane just smiled and turned to leave. Wait. Where are they going? The Galleria? Of course. The most public place possible. Right. Jax owes me a favor. Time to call it in. An hour later, Sloane stepped out of the Thorn limousine and into the sun-drenched, marble-lined atrium of the Viridia Galleria. The air hummed with the discreet chatter of the impossibly wealthy and the gentle strains of a live string quartet. She spotted Blair immediately, holding court outside a boutique called Ethel, flanked by two of her sleek, predatory friends, Chloe and Isabel. There she is. Blair trilled, air-kissing Sloane's cheeks, her perfume a cloying cloud. We were just talking about you. We were so worried, holed up in that house with. Well, you know. The unspoken hymn hung in the air. It's quite comfortable, actually, Sloane said smoothly. Blair's eyes, sharp as shards of glass, scanned Sloane's simple but exquisitely cut cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. They missed nothing, but they found no obvious weakness. Well, let's get you something a little more celebratory, shall we? You're a married woman now. The shopping began. It was a subtle, relentless assault. They steered her towards outrageously revealing dresses. Oh, but you have the figure for it, they cooed. They pointed out handbags that cost more than a semester of college. A little treat from your new husband's fortune. They whispered just loud enough for her to hear about so-and-so's husband who was seen with his mistress, casting meaningful glances her way. Sloane endured it, a placid smile on her face, all the while listening to their internal monologues. It was a symphony of pettiness. Asterisk Chloe, that sweater probably cost more than my car. How does she look so good? It's not fair. Isabel, I heard he hasn't left his wing of the house since the wedding. Probably can't. You know. Poor thing. Blair, just wait. Just you wait. I have the perfect dagger to unsheath. Asterisk they settled into a cafe, ordering sparkling water that cost $50 a bottle. It was there that Blair finally struck. You know, Sloane, she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, we all just feel so awful about how everything happened. If I had known my return would force you into such a compromising situation, I never would have come home. The other two nodded in solemn unison. It's really no one's fault but the person who occupied a position that wasn't theirs for 20 years, Chloe added, not even trying to be subtle. Exactly, Isabel chimed in. And marrying Kaylin. Well, let's be honest, if you weren't disabled, you'd never have had a chance. So in a way, it all worked out for the best. Sloane took a slow sip of her water, her gaze drifting over Blair's shoulder. And that's when she saw them. In a secluded lounge area across the atrium, partially obscured by a large sculptural fern, sat Kaylin. He was holding a sleek tablet, pretending to read, his wheelchair positioned for an unimpeded view of their table. And beside him, looking immensely entertained, was a handsome, dark-skinned man with a mischievous grin, undoubtedly Jax, the friend from the wedding. And then, the voice she'd been waiting for filled her head. That emerald green dress in the Ethel window. That's her color. It would make her eyes look like jewels. Why is that harpy Chloe sneering? If she insults my wife again, I'm buying her father's company and firing him. And Isabel. If he weren't disabled. I'd like to see her face if I stood up right now. A wave of unexpected warmth spread through Sloane's chest. He was here. He was watching. And he was furious on her behalf. It was time to stop playing defense. She set her glass down with a soft, definitive click. The sound drew the attention of all three women. Blair, Sloane said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through their simpering. You've been laboring under a few misconceptions, and I feel it's only fair to correct them. Blair's smile tightened. Oh? First, Sloane began, holding up a finger. My marriage to Kaylin wasn't a fallback plan. It was a strategic alliance your parents begged for. There's no compromise here. There is only a business transaction that you were deemed unsuitable for. Blair's face flushed an ugly red. Yes. That's my girl. Go for the jugular. Kaylin's inner voice was a triumphant roar. Second, Sloane continued, a sharp edge entering her tone, while my husband may have limited mobility, he remains the sole heir and acting head of Ether Tech. His mind, his power, and his fortune are all very much intact. I'd be careful about how you speak of him. You never know who's listening. She let her gaze drift meaningfully around the atrium. Isabel and Chloe had the decency to look mortified. Third, Sloane said, finally pulling the black card from her clutch and placing it on the table. It was a simple, matte black rectangle, but it landed with the weight of a guillotine. My husband was kind enough to give me this. Unlimited spending. It's really quite tedious, having to think about money so little. She picked up the card again, tapping it lightly against her palm. So you can keep your sympathy, Blair. And you can keep your little barbs. I find I really don't have the need for them anymore. She stood up, the very picture of cool elegance. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I saw a dress I'd like to buy. In emerald green. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. As she strode toward the Ethel boutique, she heard Kaylin's internal monologue, now giddy with pride. Did you see that? She destroyed them. She was magnificent. A queen. She even mentioned the emerald dress. It's like we're psychically linked. Wait, are we? No, don't be an idiot, Kaylin. Inside Ethel, she pointed to the emerald gown. This one, please. And the sapphire blue, and the crimson. My size. The sales assistant's eyes widened, but she eagerly began gathering the items. As Sloane approached the counter to pay, she took a path that led her directly past the fern-shrouded lounge. She paused, as if noticing them for the first time. Kaylin? Jax? What a surprise. Jax's grin was infectious. Sloane. Fancy meeting you here. You were. Spectacular. He shot a look at Kaylin, who was doing his best impression of a man who had just been interrupted during very important business. She saw us. She definitely saw us. Play it cool. Be aloof. Business meeting, Kaylin said, his voice flat, not looking up from his tablet. Business meeting? Business meeting? That's the best I could come up with? I'm a billionaire, not a real estate agent. Jax choked back a laugh, clearly privy to at least some of the situation. Of course, Sloane said, her lips twitching. Well, don't let me keep you. She paid for the dresses with the black card, the beep of the terminal sounding like a victory chime. As she turned to leave with her armful of glossy bags, Jax sprang up. Here, let me help you with those, sis-in-law. Before Sloane could respond, she heard Kaylin's internal screech. Jax, you traitorous son of a, stay away from my wife. With a sudden, surprisingly smooth and powerful motion, Kaylin maneuvered his wheelchair forward, physically inserting it between Sloane and Jax. Go home, he commanded Sloane, his tone gruff, his ears faintly pink. Smooth, Thorne. Real smooth. Just grunt at her like a caveman. That'll win her heart. Sloane looked at him, then at the mountain of shopping bags in her hands, then at the empty handles of his wheelchair. An idea, delicious and audacious, sparked in her mind. Of course, darling, she said sweetly. And with effortless grace, she began hanging the loops of every single shopping bag on the armrests of his high-tech, multi-million-dollar wheelchair. The sleek black titanium was soon buried under a riot of pastel boutique bags, dangling like bizarre, expensive ornaments. Kaylin sat utterly still, his body rigid with shock. She's using my wheelchair as a shopping cart. A very, very expensive shopping cart. I should be furious. This is undignified. I love it. Jax was now openly howling with laughter, clutching his stomach. Oh, I have to get a picture of this. The great Kaylin Thorne, brought low by Prada and Gucci. Kaylin shot him a death glare. You breathe a word of this, Sterling, and I will short sell your entire portfolio. Come along, husband, Sloane said, her voice light as she began to push the now burdened wheelchair towards the exit. We wouldn't want to be late for your business meeting. As she pushed him, his rigid posture slowly began to relax. She felt the faint tremor of a laugh he was suppressing. Her hands are on my chair. She's pushing me. This is the best day of my life. And for the first time since this whole bizarre arrangement began, Sloane felt a genuine, unforced laugh bubble up inside her. This was, without a doubt, the strangest and most entertaining marriage in the history of Viridia City. And it was only just beginning. The silence in Thorn Manor that night was different. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive quiet of strangers coexisting. It was a charged, humming stillness, the kind that comes after a lightning strike, waiting for the thunder. Sloane lay in the center of her vast bed, the memory of the shopping trip playing on a loop behind her eyes. The weight of the shopping bags on Kalen's wheelchair. The shock on his face, quickly masked by grudging amusement. The way Jax had nearly collapsed from laughter. And underneath it all, the constant, thrilling soundtrack of Kalen's thoughts, a chaotic mix of panic, pride, and something warmer, something that made her stomach flutter. She had pushed him, literally and figuratively. And he hadn't broken. He had, in his own bizarre way, played along. The digital clock flipped to 2:08 a.m. She heard it before she saw anything, the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of the bedroom door opening. Her heart leapt into her throat. She didn't move, keeping her breathing deep and even, her body slack with feigned sleep. He moved with a predator's grace, a dark silhouette against the moonlit glass wall. There was no whir of a motor, no sound of wheels on polished concrete. Just the soft press of his bare feet on the floor. She's asleep. Good. I shouldn't be here. This is a violation of at least a dozen unspoken rules. He stood at the foot of her bed, closer than he had been the first time. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the clean, masculine scent of his skin soap and something uniquely Kalen. It was intoxicating. What am I even doing? One day she's hanging shopping bags on my multi-million-dollar mobility aid, and the next I'm creeping into her room like a ghost. I'm losing my mind. He took another silent step, coming to stand beside her. The moonlight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the dark sweep of his lashes. His gaze was intense, tracing the line of her shoulder, the curve of her cheek. That look she gave Blair today. Like she could see straight through to her rotten core. She's magnificent. And she's stuck here with a liar. His hand lifted, hovering just inches from her hair. Sloane held her breath. Just one touch. To see if it's as soft as it looks. Then I'll go. I swear. His fingertips, calloused and surprisingly warm, brushed against a stray strand of her hair. The contact was electric, a jolt that shot straight through her. A soft, involuntary sigh escaped her lips before she could stop it. Kalen froze, his entire body locking up. Shit. She's awake. She's awake and she's going to scream. Or laugh. Or call security. Abort. Abort mission. But Sloane didn't scream. She didn't move. She simply opened her eyes and met his startled gaze in the semi-darkness. Couldn't sleep? She asked, her voice a sleep-roughened whisper. He jerked his hand back as if burned. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his internal monologue a frantic, statusy mess. Then, the mask of the cold, detached tycoon slammed back into place, but it was cracked, and she could see the panic in his eyes. I was checking the perimeter sensors on this floor, he said, the lie clumsy and utterly transparent. There was a blip. A blip? A blip? I'm a tech genius and that's the best I can do? I'm doomed. Sloane pushed herself up on her elbows, the sheets pooling around her waist. She didn't call him on the lie. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him, standing there in the moonlight, so clearly able-bodied and so desperately trying to maintain his charade. Kalen, she said, her tone gentle but unwavering. We need to talk about your miraculous midnight recovery. The air left his lungs in a quiet rush. He took a half-step back, his face paling. The panic in his mind solidified into sheer, unadulterated terror. She knows. How does she know? How long has she known? Was it last night? Has she known since the beginning? Is this all a game to her? Who is she? He said nothing, his jaw clenched so tight she feared he might crack a tooth. Sloane swung her legs over the side of the bed, not breaking eye contact. The legs. They work just fine. The wheelchair is a prop. The accident. It wasn't just an accident, was it? It was sabotage. His eyes widened, the shock so profound it broke through his frozen state. What? He breathed, the word barely audible. You're pretending to be weak, Sloane continued, her voice low and steady. You're letting your enemy think he's won, that you're broken. You're gathering evidence, playing the long game, waiting for the right moment to take him down. Probably your uncle, Silas. Am I warm? Kalen stared at her as if she'd just grown a second head. The storm in his gray eyes was tumultuous, a whirlwind of fear, suspicion, and a dawning, staggering respect. How? How could she possibly? No one knows. Not even Jax has all the pieces. Is she working for him? Was she sent by Silas? But no. The way she looked at Blair. The way she stood up to them. That wasn't an act. His silence was answer enough. Sloane stood up, closing the small distance between them. She was in nothing but a thin silk chemise, but she felt more powerful than she ever had in a ball gown. She had the truth. I'm not your enemy, Kalen, she said softly, her gaze holding his. From the moment you put that ring on my finger, for better or worse, we've been on the same side. Your enemies are my enemies. The fight seemed to drain out of him. His shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in a profound, weary relief. The pretense was over. Here, in the moonlit privacy of her room, he could finally stop acting. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, letting out a long, shaky breath. Who are you, Sloane Rutherford? He asked, his voice raw. Sloane Thorne, she corrected gently. And I'm the woman who can help you. He searched her face, his eyes tracing every feature as if seeing her for the first time. The suspicion was still there, a lifetime of caution hard to erase, but it was being slowly eclipsed by a desperate, burgeoning hope. How, he finally asked, the word a surrender. How did you find out? Sloane offered a small, enigmatic smile. Let's just say I'm very observant. And the Rutherfords taught me to recognize a performance from a mile away. I've spent my whole life surrounded by them. It was a deflection, and he knew it. But he was too off balance, too exposed, to press further. The simple fact was that she knew. And she wasn't running to the press. She wasn't blackmailing him. She was standing before him, in the dead of night, offering an alliance. He truly looked at her not as a pawn or a problem, but as a partner. The woman who had faced down his scheming family and her own with equal parts grace and ferocity. The woman who was now seeing him at his most vulnerable. A slow, real smile, the first she had ever seen from him, touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the harsh angles, making him look younger, more alive. It's a deal, he said, his voice low and intimate in the quiet room. He didn't move to touch her again. He didn't need to. The space between them was no longer a chasm of deception, but a bridge, newly built and strong. They stood there for a long moment, two conspirators in the moonlight, the game forever changed. Then, with a final, lingering look, he turned and walked silently from the room on his own two, perfectly steady feet, leaving Sloane with the thrilling, terrifying certainty that their marriage of convenience had just become a whole lot more interesting. The study felt different in the stark light of morning. Last night, it had been a shadowy stage for a clandestine revelation. Now, with sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, it was a war room. Kalen was standing by the window, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. He wasn't pretending anymore. The wheelchair was parked in a corner, looking like a discarded prop. Seeing him like this tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating a latent, powerful energy was still a shock to Sloane's system. This was the real Kalen Thorne, the predator, not the caged lion he presented to the world. He turned as she entered, his gray eyes clear and focused. The vulnerability of the night before was gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating intensity. She's here. Okay. Deep breath. Don't scare her off with the corporate espionage talk. Start simple. Coffee? He asked, gesturing to a sleek carafe on his desk. Please, Sloane said, taking a seat in one of the leather armchairs. She needed the caffeine. She'd spent the rest of the night oscillating between exhilaration and sheer terror at the precipice she'd just jumped off. He poured a cup, his movements efficient and sure, and brought it to her. Their fingers brushed during the handoff, and a jolt, warm and electric, passed between them. His eyes flickered to hers, and for a second, the calculating intensity wavered. Her skin is so soft. Focus, Thorne. Sabotage. Betrayal. Not how soft your wife's hands are. So, Sloane began, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Uncle Silas. Kalen leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. The simple action showcased the strength in his frame, a stark reminder of the performance he'd been maintaining. Silas, he confirmed, his voice a low rumble. My father's younger brother. He always thought the company should have been his. The accident was his opening move. A faulty brake line, very professional. He thought it would finish me. When it didn't, he saw an opportunity. To make you look weak, Sloane finished. A broken heir is easier to overthrow than a strong one. Precisely. The board gets nervous. The shareholders get skittish. And Silas is there, the dependable, capable alternative, whispering solutions in their ears. He took a sip of his own coffee, his gaze turning inward. He's been slowly poisoning the well for months. Spreading rumors about my instability. Making strategic mistakes in divisions I oversee to make me look incompetent. This marriage, he gestured between them, was the final piece of his puzzle. He pushed for it. He thought a union with a disgraced fake heiress would be the final nail in my coffin, proof I was no longer fit to lead. Sloane raised an eyebrow. And you agreed because? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Because it was the one move he wouldn't expect. He thought he was giving me a liability. I saw, he paused, his eyes meeting hers. An opportunity. A partner who understood what it was like to have your life stolen out from under you. The honesty in his words, both spoken and unspoken, struck a chord deep within her. I saw you. In the file the Rutherfords provided. There was a fire in your eyes, even in that photograph. A defiance. I knew you wouldn't break. I knew you'd fight. So, what's the plan? Sloane asked, her voice steady. We can't just wait for him to make another move. We don't have to, Kalen said, pushing off the desk and walking to his holographic interface. With a few fluid gestures, he brought up a complex organizational chart of Ether Tech. A few names were highlighted in red. He's planted his people. A mole in the finance department, a sycophant in R&D. He's funneling money, siphoning intellectual property. I have suspicions, but the evidence is buried deep. He's careful. Then we need to make him careless, Sloane said, her mind already racing, drawing on a lifetime of observing the Rutherfords' petty power plays. He thinks I'm a shallow, powerless socialite, right? A decorative piece you were forced to acquire. Kalen nodded slowly, a spark of understanding igniting in his eyes. He thinks you're irrelevant. Perfect, Sloane smiled, a sharp, cunning expression. Let him. You keep playing the brooding, distracted cripple. And I'll play the vapid new wife, bored and looking for a project. Who pays attention to a bored socialite? She hears things. She sees things. People let their guard down around her. God, she's brilliant. The thought was filled with such pure, unadulterated admiration that Sloane had to look down at her coffee to hide her reaction. The annual EtherTech Gala is in 2 weeks, Kalen said, a real, strategic smile finally gracing his features. It was a devastating sight. It's the biggest event of the year. Every board member, every major shareholder, every rival, and every sycophant will be there. Silas will be in his element, holding court. And so will we, Sloane finished. That's our stage. For the next hour, they plotted. It was a strange and exhilarating dance. Kalen provided the hard data, the corporate landscape, the technological specifics. Sloane provided the social strategy, the psychological insights, the art of the subtle dig and the unspoken alliance. They were two halves of a whole, their skill sets perfectly complementary. At one point, he leaned over her shoulder to point something out on the hologram, his chest brushing against her back. The scent of him clean linen and something uniquely male enveloped her. His internal monologue, for once, was quiet, his focus entirely on the task at hand. But the heat of him was a constant, distracting presence. Finally, he straightened. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back. Silas is dangerous. Sloane met his gaze without flinching. My old life ended the moment Blair walked through the door. This feels like a beginning. I'm not afraid of your uncle. She smiled faintly. I was raised by Vivian Rutherford. I'm immune to poison. He laughed, a short, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. It transformed his face completely, lighting it from within. I think I'm in trouble. The thought was so quiet, so fleeting, she almost missed it. But it was there. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a second before he gently took hers. His palm was warm, his grip firm. It wasn't the possessive clasp of a husband, nor the cold formality of a business partner. It was the grip of a comrade in arms. Then it's you and me, he said, his voice low and serious. It's you and me, Sloane echoed, her hand tightening in his. In that moment, surrounded by the schematics of their shared battle, the marriage of convenience vanished. What was left in its place was something far more potent, far more dangerous, and infinitely more real, a partnership. And as Sloane looked at their joined hands, she felt a thrill that had nothing to do with corporate espionage and everything to do with the man whose secrets she now held, and whose stormy gray eyes were looking at her not as a pawn, but as an equal. The EtherTech Gala was the social comet that streaked across Viridia City's calendar once a year, and tonight, it was blazing. The company's headquarters' main atrium had been transformed into a crystalline wonderland, with holographic constellations drifting across the vaulted glass ceiling, and the low, thrumming beat of music felt more than heard. It was a sea of power and privilege, and every shark in the water was circling. Sloane stood before the full-length mirror in her suite, a vision in emerald. The dress was the one from the Galleria, the color Kaelin had silently championed. It was a masterpiece of architecture and allure, hugging her curves before cascading to the floor, its back a daring plunge of sheer lace. The thorn diamonds, a stunning Art Deco necklace and matching earrings, glittered with a cold, expensive fire at her throat and ears. She looked every inch the trophy wife. It was the perfect camouflage. A soft knock preceded Kaelin's entrance. He was in his wheelchair, dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than most cars, his expression the familiar mask of icy detachment. But his eyes, when they landed on her, darkened. Holy hell. I can't even form a coherent thought. How am I supposed to concentrate with her looking like that? This is a tactical nightmare. He cleared his throat. Are you ready? As I'll ever be, Sloane said, turning to face him. Remember the plan. You're the brooding, preoccupied genius. I'm the dazzled new wife, easily impressed and slightly out of my depth. Out of her depth? She could drain this entire ocean and sell it back to them. He gave a curt nod. Just stay close. Oh, I wouldn't dream of being anywhere else, she murmured, a sly smile playing on her lips. The moment they entered the atrium, a hush fell, followed by a surge of whispers. The air was thick with curiosity and judgment. Sloane kept her hand resting lightly on Kaelin's shoulder, her smile bright and vacuous. They were immediately approached by a tall, florid-faced man with a too-hearty laugh. Gareth Smythe, a board member firmly in Silas's pocket. Kaelin. My boy. And this must be the lovely Sloane. Gareth boomed, taking her hand and kissing it with wet lips. A stunning addition to the Thorne family. Just stunning. Silas was right. The boys lost his edge. Parading this pretty bauble around like a prize. The company needs strong leadership, not a broken man and his decorative wife. Thank you, Mr. Smythe, Sloane gushed, her voice a little too high, her eyes wide with feigned admiration. This is all so grand. The lights. The music. Kaelin, darling, you never told me it would be so magical. She felt Kaelin's shoulder tense under her hand. Magical? She's laying it on a bit thick. Is she? No, look at her, she's perfect. Smythe is eating it up. We're proud of our traditions, Gareth said condescendingly. It's a shame your husband has been too preoccupied to truly appreciate them lately. Sloane's smile didn't waver, but her mind was racing, scanning the crowd. She spotted Silas Thorne across the room. He was an older, softer-edged version of Kaelin, with a politician's smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. He was holding court, surrounded by admirers. Then, her gaze landed on a woman standing slightly apart from Silas's circle, a severe-looking woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes. Agatha Croft, Deputy Director of Finance. Kaelin's suspected mole. As if on cue, Silas began making his way toward them, his smile widening. Nephew. Sloane. You both look wonderful. His eyes swept over Kaelin's wheelchair with a barely concealed flicker of satisfaction. It's good to see you out and about. I trust you're not overexerting yourself. Stay in your chair, boy. Where you belong. Uncle, Kalen acknowledged, his voice flat. Oh, we're having a marvelous time. Sloane interjected, looping her arm through Kalen's in a show of wifely devotion. I was just telling Kalen how inspiring it all is. It reminds me of a piece I read in Tech Horizon last month about the future of neural interfaces. The author argued that true innovation lies not in processing power, but in intuitive, empathetic design. It made me think of EtherTech's early philosophy. It's so refreshing to see a company that hasn't lost its soul to pure profit. The air around them stilled. Gareth Smythe looked confused. Silas's smile became fixed. Kalen, however, went perfectly still. The words she'd just spoken were almost verbatim from a private, unpublished memo he'd written, his secret vision for the company's future, the very antithesis of Silas's cutthroat, short-term profit strategy. What? How did she? That was from my Project Chimera file. It's encrypted. She couldn't have, unless she actually listened. She understood. He looked up at her, and for a split second, the mask of indifference fell away, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. Silas recovered first. A fascinating perspective, my dear. Though perhaps a bit naive for the current market realities. Is it naive to believe in the heart of the company your brother built? Sloane asked, her tone sweet as poison. I think it's rather brave. Before Silas could retort, a tinkling of a spoon against glass signaled the start of the speeches. As the crowd shifted its attention, Sloane leaned down, her lips close to Kalen's ear. Agatha Croft. She's wearing a necklace with a locket. She keeps touching it when she looks at Silas. It's not jewelry. It's a data drive. Kalen's breath caught. The Nix drive. He's giving her instructions in person. She's the conduit. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in subtle warfare. Sloane floated through the crowd, a butterfly collecting pollen. She complimented one board member's wife on her charity work, subtly reminding her that Silas had voted against the company matching donations. She giggled vacuously at another executive's joke, while her sharp eyes noted the nervous glance he exchanged with Agatha Croft. She was playing them all, and they never saw it coming. They saw a pretty face, a distraction. They underestimated her, just as she knew they would. The final test came from Cassandra, Silas's daughter. Dressed in a flamboyant feathered gown that made her look like an angry swan, she accidentally bumped into Sloane, sending a cascade of champagne down the emerald silk. Oh. Clumsy me. Cassandra simpered, her eyes gleaming with malice. A gasp went up around them. All eyes turned to Sloane, waiting for the tears, the outrage, the humiliation. Sloane looked down at the ruined dress, then up at Cassandra. Her smile was chillingly calm. It's quite all right, Cassandra, she said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. It's only a dress. Though, it's a shame. It was a gift from Kalen to celebrate the finalization of the Etherpulse patents. The ones your father tried so hard to delay. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that only those closest could hear. I suppose some stains are harder to remove than others, aren't they? Cassandra's face went sheet white. The Etherpulse delay was a piece of insider knowledge, a quiet failure of Silas's that Kalen had only mentioned in passing. How could this empty-headed socialite possibly know? Sloane didn't wait for a response. She turned, her head held high, the dark stain on her dress looking less like a flaw and more like a battle scar. She walked back to Kalen, who was watching her, his gaze burning with an emotion she couldn't name. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and sure. He brought her knuckles to his lips and pressed a firm, lingering kiss against her skin. It wasn't for show. It was a seal. The crowd watched, utterly captivated. And in the silence of his mind, she heard it. Not a frantic monologue, not a strategic thought. Just two simple, devastating words, repeated with the reverence of a prayer. My wife. The gala's triumph was a fleeting warmth, quickly eclipsed by a chilling draft from the past. It arrived not with a shout, but with a weepy, trembling phone call 2 days later. Sloane? It's your mother. Your real mother. The voice on the line was frayed with tears, a masterpiece of performed desperation. It's your brother, Leo. He's taken a turn for the worse. The doctors, they say he needs the transplant now. Tonight. There's no more time. Sloane stood in the center of her sunlit living room, the phone pressed to her ear, her body going cold. She had agreed to the tests, had seen the matching results herself. The logic was there, clean and clinical. But everything else, the timing, the sudden urgency, the raw, theatrical panic in the woman's voice screamed trap. Don't. Don't you believe it? This is him. This is Silas. I can feel it. Kalen had rolled into the room, his presence a solid, angry force. He didn't need to hear the other side of the conversation, the look on her face was enough. Where is he? Sloane asked, her voice deliberately calm, playing her part. Viridia General. The oncology wing. Please, Sloane, he's your blood. Your only brother. You have to come. I'll be there, Sloane said, and hung up. The silence in the room was brittle. You're not going, Kalen stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. His hands were clenched on the arms of his wheelchair. I have to. No. It's a slaughterhouse. They'll drain her dry in some back room and call it a tragic medical error. It's too dangerous, he growled aloud. If I don't go, we'll never prove it. We'll always wonder. And Silas will just try something else. She walked over to him, kneeling so they were eye level. This is our chance to turn his trap back on him. We know it's coming. We're ready. His gray eyes searched hers, a storm of fear and fury. She's right. Damn it, she's always right. But if anything happens to her, he reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, unvarnished feeling. Then I'm coming with you. At the hospital, the sterility of the oncology wing was a stark contrast to the gala's opulence. The air smelled of antiseptic and dread. Her parents rushed her the moment she stepped off the elevator, their faces masks of grief. Oh, thank God, you're here, the woman sobbed, clutching at Sloane's arms. He's crashing. They've taken him into emergency surgery, but he's hemorrhaging. They need blood, Sloane. So much blood. You're his only hope. The man nodded, his eyes darting nervously. Just get her to the pre-op room. The doctor is ready. Silas said no witnesses. Of course, Sloane said, her voice soft. Whatever he needs. Kalen, seated in his wheelchair, was a silent, seething pillar of tension beside her. Jax, posing as his nurse for the evening, pushed the chair, his usual levity replaced by a sharp, watchful intensity. They were led to a private preoperative room. It was too quiet, too isolated. The phlebotomist will be right in, the woman said, wringing her hands. They'll need to take a lot, dear. To have it on hand for the surgery. It might make you a bit dizzy. A bit dizzy? They're going to take every last drop. Kalen's thought was a snarl. Sloane sat on the edge of the paper-covered bed. She looked at Kalen, a question in her eyes. Now, before he could respond, the door opened and a man in a white coat entered. He didn't look at her face, just at the crook of her arm. All right, let's get this started. We're on a tight schedule. He was too brisk, too impersonal. And his thoughts were a cold, clinical checklist. 2000 cc's. Sedate if necessary. Dispose of the waste. As the phlebotomist tightened a rubber tourniquet around her arm, Kalen spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. Doctor, do you know how much blood a healthy adult can safely donate at one time? The man didn't look up. We'll take what's needed for the patient. 400 milliliters, Kalen said, the words dropping like stones. Any more causes hypovolemic shock. Organ damage. Death. He locked eyes with Sloane. A leukemia patient in crisis might need 2000. They're not asking you to donate, Sloane. They're asking you to die. The phlebotomist froze. Sloane's mother let out a sharp gasp. How dare you, the man blustered, stepping forward. We're trying to save our son. Are you? Kalen's voice cut through the man's bluster. He held up his phone, displaying a photo Jax had just sent to him. It showed the couple, clear as day, accepting an envelope from Silas Thorne in a dimly lit parking garage. Because it looks an awful lot like you were paid $5 million to deliver my wife to a butcher. The trap was sprung. The mask shattered. The father's face contorted with rage and panic. You have no proof. You're a cripple who doesn't know when he's beaten. In that moment, several things happened at once. The phlebotomist, realizing the game was up, pulled a concealed syringe from his coat. Sloane's mother shrieked and lunged not at Kaylin, but at Sloane, her fingers clawed. And Kaylin moved. It wasn't the slow, careful rise of a convalescent. It was an explosion of pent-up power. He launched himself from the wheelchair, his body uncoiling with a predator's speed. His fist connected with the phlebotomist's jaw with a sickening crack, sending the man and his syringe sprawling. In the same fluid motion, he shoved Sloane behind him, putting his own body between her and the charging woman. The room froze. The only sound was the pained groan of the phlebotomist. Sloane's parents stood paralyzed, staring at Kaylin Thorne, who was standing on his own 2 feet, tall and formidable, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a lethal fire. The carefully constructed narrative of the broken heir lay in ruins at their feet. "Are you okay? Did she hurt you? Tell me she didn't hurt you." His thought was a frantic, silent plea, even as his body remained a shield. "I'm fine," Sloane whispered, her hand coming to rest on his back. She could feel the rigid tension in his muscles, the fierce, protective heat radiating from him. Jax was already on his phone, his voice low and urgent. "We're at Viridia General, Oncology Pre-Op. We have a situation. Send security. And the police." The fight went out of the fake parents. The woman crumpled to the floor, sobbing real tears of terror now. The man just stared, his mouth agape. Kaylin didn't look at them. He turned, his hands coming up to frame Sloane's face, his gaze scanning her for any sign of injury. "I told you it was a trap," he breathed, his voice raw with a fear he could no longer conceal. "I know," she said, her own voice trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming force of his presence, his sacrifice. He had revealed his biggest secret, his most powerful card, for her. To save her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She could feel the frantic, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Never again. I will never let you be this vulnerable again." In the sterile, hostile silence of the hospital room, surrounded by the wreckage of Silas's plot, Sloane wasn't thinking about conspiracies or evidence. She was thinking about the solid strength of the arms around her, the scent of him, and the devastating, undeniable truth. The fake marriage was over. The partnership was real. And the line between strategic alliance and something infinitely more personal had just been obliterated. The ride back to Thorne Manor was a silent, seismic shift. The usual tension was gone, replaced by a thick, humming energy that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man sitting beside her. Kaylin wasn't in his wheelchair. He sat upright on the plush leather seat, his gaze fixed on the passing city lights, his posture radiating a rawness Sloane had never seen before. The pretense was over, and the man emerging from the shattered chrysalis was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He didn't speak. His mind, for once, was a quiet, turbulent sea, the thoughts too deep and complicated to form into clear words. She could feel the echo of them, the adrenaline crash, the fury at Silas, the lingering terror that had gripped him when that syringe came out. But louder than all of it was a single, reverberating note, the feel of her in his arms. When the car stopped, he didn't wait for the driver. He got out, opened her door, and offered his hand. It wasn't a gesture of chivalry, it was a claim. His fingers wrapped around hers, warm and sure, and he didn't let go as they walked into the silent, dark house. They ended up in his study, the site of their first alliance. But the air was different now. The strategic maps and holograms were forgotten. He went straight to a locked cabinet, retrieved a crystal decanter of amber liquid, and poured 2 glasses with hands that were only now beginning to steady. He handed one to Sloane. "Drink," he said, his voice gravelly. "You're in shock." She wasn't, not really. But she took the glass, their fingers brushing. The brandy burned a welcome path down her throat. He downed his in one go, wincing slightly as the fire hit his stomach. He braced his hands on the desk, his head bowed. The fine wool of his tuxedo jacket stretched taut across his shoulders. "I showed him. I showed all of them. But I showed her most of all. And now? What happens now?" "You saved my life," Sloane said softly, stating the simple, monumental fact. He turned then, his eyes dark pools in the dim light. "He was going to kill you." The words were laced with a violence that made her shiver. "For a corporate takeover. He was going to have you murdered in a hospital room. And you stopped him." She took a step closer. "You stood up. A harsh, broken sound escaped him, something between a laugh and a sob. Yeah. I did. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand on end. The perfect, controlled billionaire was gone. In his place was a man stripped bare. My father. The car accident. It wasn't just sabotage, Sloane. He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so profound it stole her breath. It was my fault. It wasn't your fault, she said, the words leaving her lips without a second thought, an instinctive rebuttal to the agonized thought she'd heard. He stared at her, shocked. How did you? I know you, Kaylin, she said, cutting him off, her voice fierce. I know you now. You would never. He was driving me to a race, Kaylin interrupted, the story tumbling out as if a dam had burst. I was young, arrogant. I'd designed a new ignition system, I was sure it was flawless. I begged him to come see me test it. He was so proud. The system shorted out. The car lost power on the bridge. The oncoming truck. He squeezed his eyes shut. Silas tampered with my design, yes. But I was the one who built it. I was the one who insisted he come. My mother. She couldn't even look at me after. She blamed me. She was right to. The raw confession hung in the air between them. This was the wound, the source of all the ice and the anger. The guilt that had festered for years. Sloane didn't hesitate. She crossed the room, set her glass down, and placed her hands on either side of his face, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me, she said, her voice low and unwavering. You were a victim, just like your father. Silas is the monster. He murdered your father and tried to destroy you. Your mother's grief blinded her. But it was not your fault. He looked at her, his defenses crumbling completely. The last vestiges of the icy tycoon melted away, leaving only a man haunted by a ghost. She believes me. She actually believes me. He brought his hands up to cover hers, his touch desperate. Sloane. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He leaned forward, his forehead coming to rest against hers. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, sharing the same weight. The brandy on his breath, the scent of her perfume, the quiet hum of the house had all blurred into a single, hyper-focused point of connection. When he finally kissed her, it wasn't like the chaste, public brush of lips at their wedding. It was a claiming. It was a confession. It was desperate and hungry and full of all the words they hadn't said. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him, and Sloane met his fervor with her own, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body molding to his. The world narrowed to the feel of his mouth on hers, the solid strength of his body, the low groan that rumbled in his chest. This was no strategic move. This was an inevitability. He broke the kiss, his breath ragged, his eyes searching hers. Stay, he whispered, the single word a question, a plea, a command. She answered by taking his hand and leading him from the study, away from the shadows of the past, and toward his bedroom, their bedroom. The pretense was over. The mask was off. And in its place was something terrifyingly, beautifully real. The morning light was gentle, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Kaylin's bedroom, a room Sloane was seeing for the first time. It was as minimalist as the rest of the house, but lived in. A stack of books on the nightstand, a discarded sweater thrown over a chair. She woke to the feeling of his arm draped heavily over her waist, his body a warm, solid presence at her back. His breathing was deep and even, his face relaxed in sleep, the lines of worry and anger smoothed away. He looked younger. Vulnerable. She's here. She's really here. The thought was a soft, sleepy hum, filled with a wonder that made her heart ache. She shifted slightly, and his arm tightened, pulling her closer. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, there was no thought, just a hazy, contented warmth. Then, awareness dawned, and with it, a flicker of the old uncertainty. Was it too much? Did I move too fast? What if Sloane turned in his arms to face him? She didn't say anything. She just reached up and traced the line of his jaw, her touch quieting the storm in his mind before it could fully form. He captured her hand, kissing her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. Good morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Good morning, she replied, a slow smile spreading across her face. The dynamic in the house had irrevocably changed. When Edith brought breakfast to the dining room, she found them both there, Kaylin standing by the window, sipping coffee, while Sloane read the news on a tablet. They weren't just coexisting, they were occupying the same space, a quiet intimacy woven between them. Edith's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled with a knowing, delighted smile before she discreetly retreated. Later, as they discussed the fallout from the hospital, the arrested parents, the fleeing phlebotomist, the evidence they now had against Silas, Kaylin paced. He didn't sit, he didn't retreat to his wheelchair. He moved around the room with a restless energy, his mind sharp and focused. He'll be scrambling, Kaylin said. He knows I'm not what I seemed. He'll be covering his tracks, trying to discredit us. Then we don't give him time to breathe, Sloane said, looking up from the tablet. She turned it around to show him. We release the story. Now. On the screen was a draft press release, along with the damning photo of Silas paying off her parents. It was bold. It was aggressive. It was a declaration of war. Kaylin looked from the screen to her face, a slow, genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes, spreading across his features. It was a sight more breathtaking than any victory. My partner. He walked over, leaned down, and kissed her, hard and quick. Do it. As Sloane sent the command that would ignite the final battle with Silas, she felt no fear. She felt Kaylin's hand on her shoulder, a solid, grounding weight. The mask was off. The game had changed. And for the first time, they were facing the future not as allies in a convenient lie, but as partners in a truth they had chosen for themselves. The calm that settled over Thorne Manor in the days following the hospital confrontation was deceptive, the quiet eye of a hurricane. The press release Sloane had sent, a concise, brutal piece of journalism accompanied by the incriminating photo, had detonated across Viridia's financial and social networks with the force of a neutron bomb. Thorne heir unveils assassination plot by uncle, the headline screamed. Billionaire Kaylin Thorne reveals miraculous recovery, accuses uncle of attempted murder. The public feasted on the scandal. EtherTech stock, after an initial nosedive, began a steady climb as investors rallied behind the resilient, cunning heir who had outmaneuvered his treacherous uncle. Silas's carefully constructed empire of influence was crumbling into dust and lawyers. Kaylin, for his part, was a man unleashed. He worked from his study, but the wheelchair was gone. He paced, he stood at the holographic interface for hours, he commanded video conferences with a sharp, focused authority that had his subordinates scrambling to keep up. The brooding pretense was gone, replaced by the formidable reality. Sloane was his constant shadow and strategic partner. They dissected every piece of incoming data, every shred of evidence the police had uncovered from the fake parents, who were now singing like canaries to save their own skins. He'll make a move at the emergency board meeting, Kaylin said, his gaze fixed on the live feed of the EtherTech Tower lobby, where news vans were camped out. It's his last chance. He'll try to discredit me, to say my deception proves I'm unstable. He'll try to use your mother, Sloane said quietly, looking up from her own tablet. Kaylin's jaw tightened. The one variable they couldn't control. His mother, Eleanor Thorne, had retreated to her estate after the news broke, issuing no statement. Her silence was a void, and voids had a way of being filled by your enemies. She won't. She couldn't. His thought was a hopeful, desperate thing. He's desperate, Kaylin, Sloane said, her voice gentle but firm. Desperate men use every weapon they have. The day of the emergency board meeting arrived, thick with tension. The EtherTech boardroom, a circular chamber of polished black stone and live data walls, was packed. Every seat was filled, the air buzzing with nervous energy. Kaylin entered not in a wheelchair, but on his own 2 feet, with Sloane at his side. A collective, sharp intake of breath greeted his entrance. Seeing the rumors confirmed was a shock to the system. He took his seat at the head of the table, Sloane beside him. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were chips of flint. Silas, seated halfway down the table, looked like he'd aged a decade. His complexion was gray, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. But his eyes still burned with a venomous hatred. The meeting began with legal formalities, the dry recitation of the evidence against Silas, the attempted murder, the embezzlement, the corporate espionage. With each charge, Silas seemed to shrink, his allies avoiding his gaze. Then, just as the vote for his immediate removal was about to be called, Silas slammed his hand on the table. This is a farce, he snarled, his voice cracking. This performance. My nephew has deceived you all for months. He is not the stable leader this company needs. He is a liar and a manipulator. He turned his furious gaze to Sloane. And he is under the influence of a social climber who was raised in a nest of vipers. How can you trust anything he says? It was a pathetic, flailing attack. The board members shifted uncomfortably. But then, Silas played his final card. His own mother knows the truth about his character. She knows he is unfit. As if on cue, the boardroom door opened. Eleanor Thorne stood there, pale and regal in a simple black dress, a lawyer at her elbow. The room fell into a stunned hush. Kaylin went rigid beside Sloane. No. Mother, please. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, lingering for a heartbreaking second on her son's face, before settling on Silas. Her expression was not one of a grieving mother, but of cold, clear-eyed fury. You called for me, Silas, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. You thought I would come here to help you destroy my son? The son you tried to murder after you successfully murdered my husband? A wave of shock rippled through the room. Silas's face went slack with disbelief. Eleanor, what are you? I have been silent for too long, she continued, walking slowly into the room, her heels clicking on the stone floor. Blinded by grief. Allowing a poisonous man to whisper lies in my ear. She stopped, standing behind Kaylin's chair, and placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. It was the first time she had willingly touched him in years. Kaylin flinched as if burned. What is she doing? My husband died because of your greed, Silas, Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. And you tried to make me blame my boy for it. But I see you clearly now. She looked at the assembled board. My son, Kaylin, has not only survived your treachery, he has thrived. He has protected this company from a snake in its bosom. He has my full, unequivocal support. It was the final, decisive blow. The last of Silas's support evaporated. The vote to remove him from the board and sever all ties with the company was unanimous. As security moved to escort a sputtering, broken Silas from the room, he locked eyes with Sloane. Pure, undiluted hatred poured from him. This is your doing, you little bitch. This isn't over. Sloane met his gaze without flinching, a small, cold smile on her lips. She didn't need to read his mind to know his thoughts. His defeat was absolute. When the room emptied, leaving only Kaylin, Sloane, and his mother, the silence was heavy with unspoken history. Eleanor turned to her son, her eyes brimming with tears. Kaylin, I am so sorry. He looked at her, the years of hurt and distance etched on his face. He gave a slow, stiff nod, a fracture in the ice, but the thaw would take time. After she left, Kaylin stood staring at the door for a long moment. Then he turned to Sloane, the full weight of everything that had happened, the victory, the vindication, the complicated grief visible in his eyes. He didn't say a word. He simply closed the distance between them, wrapped his arms around her, and buried his face in her hair, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had just been remade. The war was over. They had won. And as Sloane held him, feeling the frantic, grateful beat of his heart against hers, she knew the Real journey was just beginning. A year. 365 days since she'd stood at the end of that red carpet, a sacrificial lamb in a lace shroud. Now, Sloane Thorne stood on the rooftop terrace of Thorne Manor, which was no longer a cold fortress but a home. The city of Viridia glittered below them like a spilled treasure chest, and the air was warm, scented with night-blooming jasmine and the salt from the sea. It was their first anniversary. Not of love, but of a pact. A beginning. Kaylin had orchestrated the entire evening. A private chef had prepared a meal under the stars. Dozens of candles and glass lanterns flickered, casting dancing shadows. There was no staff, no audience. Just them. He was different. The last vestiges of the icy, burdened man had melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence, a lightness she'd never seen before. He talked freely, his laughter coming easier, his touches a hand on the small of her back, his fingers brushing hers as he poured wine were no longer hesitant, but sure. Possessive in the best way. A year ago, I thought my life was over, Sloane said, swirling the rich, red wine in her glass. I was walking to my own execution. And I was sitting there, screaming in my head for you not to ruin my brilliant, idiotic plan, Kaylin replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. His gray eyes, once a winter storm, were now a warm, calm sea in the candlelight. The best plan I ever made, because it brought me you. The thought was so clear, so tender, it made her breath catch. He had no idea. He'd never know just how much of himself he'd unknowingly shared with her. After dessert, a decadent chocolate torte, he grew quiet. A nervous energy radiated from him, so palpable she could almost taste it. Okay. It's time. Don't drop the ring. Don't trip. For God's sake, don't call her a strategic asset. Just breathe. He stood up, the movement a little stiff, and came to stand beside her chair. Then, to her utter astonishment, he went down on one knee. The world seemed to slow, the city lights blurring into a distant galaxy. In his hand was a velvet box. Inside, nestled against black silk, was a ring. But it wasn't the cold, perfect diamond from their first wedding. This was something else entirely. A central, flawless emerald, the color of her dress, the color of his secret admiration, was flanked by two smaller, brilliant diamonds. It was unique. It was her. Sloane, he began, his voice slightly rough with emotion. A year ago, I married you with a lie. I gave you a ring that was a prop in a play. I promised you nothing but a gilded cage. He looked up at her, his gaze so open, so vulnerable, it made her heart ache. Every day since, you have taken that lie and built a truth with it. You've been my strategist, my protector, my salvation. You saw the man behind the mask, and you weren't afraid. He took a deep breath. Will she say yes? She has to say yes. The ring is the right size, I checked. I rehearsed this. Why can't I remember the words? I don't want the memory of that first day to be our foundation, he said, his voice strengthening. I want a new one. One built on trust. On partnership. On the fact that I have loved you since the moment I heard your voice, and I never want to stop hearing it. So, Sloane Thorne, will you marry me? For real this time? Tears welled in Sloane's eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. They were tears of joy, of relief, of a profound, overwhelming love for this complicated, brilliant, secretly soft-hearted man. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that felt like a vow. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, a look of pure, unadulterated bliss on his face. She said yes. She's really mine. Forever. Sloane laughed through her tears, a bubble of giddy, triumphant joy. She reached up and cupped his face. You know, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, her eyes sparkling with mischief. At the wedding, you were thinking that pretending to be disabled was exhausting, but at least your wife was sweet and soft enough to make it worth it. Kalen froze. His entire body went rigid. His eyes, which had been full of love, snapped open, wide with utter, abject horror. What? 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 How could she? No. No, it's not possible. That was in my head. That was only in my head. Is she a psychic? Was I talking in my sleep? Oh my God, the things I've thought. His internal monologue was a frantic, screaming panic, a car crash of embarrassment and disbelief. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Sloane watched the glorious, beautiful catastrophe unfolding in his mind, her smile widening. She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered the answer to the question that had haunted him for a year, using the same words he'd screamed in his head on their wedding day. Because I heard it. She felt the shiver that racked his entire frame. He pulled back, staring at her as if she'd just grown wings, and recited the entirety of Ethertech's source code backwards. The shock on his face was so complete, so priceless, it was better than any wedding gift. It was the final secret, laid bare. The last card, played. And as the initial terror in his eyes slowly melted into dawning comprehension, then into wonder, and finally into a look of such profound, intimate connection that it stole her breath, Sloane knew. The most beautiful love confession in the world wasn't a grand speech or expensive ring. It was this. Being able to hear every single, chaotic, adoring thought in his heart. And knowing, with absolute certainty, that every one of her own was echoing it back. Asterisk I love you. Asterisk.